Yes, I came to the University of Kent in 2004. Seems quite a long time ago now. This was the view from my office. I thought, what a nice place I've come to. And there's a rabbit minding its own business, looking quite innocent. I'm sure Sarah and some others will remember this, but when I first started at the university, I really loved going to induction events and anything where you kind of sat in a room and got told how to do something, because I found these events absolutely fascinating. And the first one that I actually went to was just a general introduction to the University of Kent. And in those days, somebody from Estates would come and talk about Estates type things. Jenny may have been at this one too. And the guy from Estates had forgotten his slides. But don't worry, it was fine, because what he did have was some pictures of the time the university unfortunately collapsed in 1974. Now, the reason for this, some of you might not be aware of this, David Flussfeder particularly pay attention. Here is the railway tunnel. It's called the Tyler Hill Railway Tunnel, and it's made of red and yellow brick. And it was built in 1926, and it runs under the campus. So there it is, up it goes. There's David's office. There is the half of the Horseshoe of Excellence. We might need to retitle it the Horseshoe of Doom. And then on it goes up to Cornwallis. There. In 1963, when the university was being built, the University of Kent bought this tunnel for £70 and declared it safe to build over. I think they got some external experts to do that. And the next thing that happened was this. Insert your own organising for success joke here. So you'll be interested to know as well that this tragedy took out the then computing department as it was beginning to get established. So, and I'm sure you'll be pleased to hear after the mailbox migration incidents of a couple of weeks ago, God actually came for computing twice. Once in 1974 when this happened, and then again in 1987, the hurricane took out something which was called the X.25 link. I don't know what that is, but whatever it was didn't stop Olivia Colman, no, it's really the Queen, coming and opening the Computing Services Lab in 1987, and they're still standing for now. Meanwhile, it turned out that the rabbit that looked so innocent at the start also was planning to bring down the campus, because those of you who started at the same time as me will remember the big conspiracy, Jenny's just nodding away, when we were told that because the rabbits were burrowing under the Templeman Library, they were going to bring down the whole library, thus they all had to be killed. And I think briefly one lunchtime, some of the School of English went out to protest about this, but it didn't make any difference. And then they extended the library, and I think the rabbits came back, and it was fine. Of course, I knew very little of what was going on outside Rutherford College, because between 2004 and 2006, I was lost in this corridor. On top of the tunnel of doom. And some of you will remember the Rutherford Bar in those days as well, where you could smoke. All the sofas were really sticky, and I used to go in there every lunchtime when I used to have time to do that kind of thing and read Heidegger, imagine that, and then work on this novel, The End of Mr. Y. So I'm going to just read you a tiny bit. This talk is basically pictures and a few readings, so... So I'd heard all about the tunnel, and I was really fascinated with it, and I was wandering around and thinking about it. And I'd already started working on this novel, The End of Mr. Y, a little bit before I came to the University of Kent, but in fact, I worked on most of it here in my office, and I used things that were around me as inspiration, as you will see. You now have one choice. I'm hanging out of the window of my office, sneaking a cigarette and trying to read margins in the dull winter light when there's a noise I haven't heard before. All right, the noise, crash, bang, etc. I probably have heard before, but it's coming from underneath me, which isn't right. There shouldn't be anything underneath me. I'm on the bottom floor. But the ground shakes as if someone's trying to push up from below, and I think about other people's mothers shaking out their duvets, or even God shaking out the fabric of space-time, and then I think, fucking hell, it's an earthquake, and I drop my cigarette and run out of my office at roughly the same time that the alarm starts sounding. When alarms sound, I don't always run immediately. Who does? Usually an alarm is just an empty sign, a drill, a practice. I'm on my way to the side door out of the building when the shaking stops. Shall I go back to my office? But it's impossible to stay in this building when this alarm goes off. It's too loud, it wails inside your head. As I leave the building, I walk past the health and safety notice board, which has pictures of injured people on it. The pictures blur as I go past. A man who has back pain is also having a heart attack, and various hologram people are trying to revive him. I was supposed to go to some health and safety training last year, but didn't. In real life, I did, because I love that stuff. Anyway. As I open the side door, I can see people leaving the Russell building and walking or running past our block and up the grey concrete steps in the direction of the Newton building and the library. I cut around the right-hand side of the building and bound up the concrete steps 2 at a time. The sky is grey, with a thin TV static drizzle that hangs in the air like it's been freeze-framed. Sometimes on these January afternoons, the sun squats low in the sky like an orange-robed Buddha in a documentary about the meaning of life. Today there is no sun. I come to the edge of the large crowd that has formed, and I stop running. Everyone is looking at the same thing, gasping and making firework display noises. It's the Newton building. It's falling down. I think of this toy, have I seen it on someone's desk recently, which is a little horse mounted on a wooden button. When you press the button from underneath, the horse collapses to its knees. That's what the Newton building looks like now. It's sinking into the ground, but in a lopsided way. One corner is now gone, now two, now it stops. It creaks and it stops. A window on the 3rd floor flaps open and a computer monitor falls out and smashes onto what's left of the concrete courtyard below. So, all about getting rid of computing. Oh yeah, you were supposed to be looking at that when I was reading that. Anyway, so this may come as a surprise to some newer members of the School of English, but between 2004 and 2009, there were no teaspoons in the School of English kitchen. They weren't all in my office. Probably a few of them were. The many teaspoon amnesties that took place had no effect whatsoever, but we were all distracted by the arrival of first a racing pigeon that was kept in a box in the School of English office for a while, and frequent visits from Badger the cat, who used to be fed just outside Abdurazak's office with real tuna, because it turned out that the registry and the law school were also feeding Badger, and we felt competitive with them. Until Abdurazak banned all animals from the building. This, I realised, was a great place to be a creative writer. In my interview, I'd said that I wanted to come for the library, among other things. That I wanted to be in this great place of learning and research, and I wanted this vast library to use. Unfortunately, I'd only been here for probably 18 months. By the time I'd amassed a £300 library fine. So I had to look elsewhere for inspiration. So I discovered that there is writing everywhere in this university. So this is, some of you will recognise the backs of the toilet doors in Rutherford. where people write their confessions, I get attached to easily. My milkshake brings all the boys to the yard. And here, you probably can't read it, but it says, I can't make you love me if you don't want to, but I will try to make you love me because I really love you. And someone's written underneath, that never works. Been there, done that, got the T-shirt. It sucks. I know, I hear you, sister. Reminder to stay woke, obviously. And then the many whiteboards around campus. I've collected these over the years. I knew they'd come in handy. This one, I assume somebody's plotting a thriller because there's a lot here about being tied up and can't move. It sounds terrifying. Reminders of these obvious things. This is my favourite all-time whiteboard. Since I've been here, one of the main things I've learned is that creative writers are a little bit basic compared with the rest of our colleagues, and this just proves it. That our plot diagrams have nothing on this. And then sometimes you're just wandering around and themes suggest themselves. It's a place of great inspiration. And then you go along to a job interview presentation and somebody gives you a Call Ezra Pound poem, which has been on my office wall ever since and has become one of my favourites. So in 2008, not content with trapping everybody in Rutherford, the university decided to build a labyrinth. And this is just down Elliot Hill. This is one of the official university pictures of it that's on the website. And that's what it really looks like. But I really loved the labyrinth, and I went and walked it pretty soon after it was opened. And for a while, I used to send all my students there as well to wander around. I think I still do from time to time. And the labyrinth ended up being one of the inspirations for my next novel, Our Tragic Universe. You can see it's on the front. There. It's part of the jacket design. I'd been teaching creative writing for a few years by the time I came to write this book. And this novel, it was a difficult one to write after The End of Mr. Y, because The End of Mr. Y was a surprising success for me. I hadn't really thought anybody would make it to the end of it, let alone like it, let alone recommend it to their friends. So when it did become a bestseller, it was great, but it was really surprising. And then I wanted to follow it up with something really awesome. And instead, I followed it up with this book that has arguments like this in it. So some of you who've taught the first year course, which is now a second year course, I believe, will recognise where some of this comes from. Okay, it starts with the Zen story and then moves into an argument about Aristotle. What was that really weird Zen story from that manuscript, Claudia asked me. So Claudia and Meg's the main character of this, and Claudia and Meg work on this really commercial book series, all written by this fake author called Zeb Ross. And then Claudia's sister is Vi, and Vi comes in a minute. What was that really weird Zen story from that manuscript, Claudia asked me. There were quite a lot, I said. The one with the psycho old woman who burns down the monk's hut. Oh yes, I said, that narrows it down. How did it go? There is an old woman who looks after a monk while he meditates for 20 years, Vi said. Is this it? She gives him food and water and makes his clothes, and eventually sends a prostitute to throw herself at him because she wants to see what he does with all his wisdom. He's taken a vow of chastity, but will he be tempted? The monk says something poetic to the prostitute about an old tree growing on a cold rock, and tells her that there is no warmth. When the spurned prostitute tells of this, the old woman is angry that she has supported someone who, after 20 years, has not learned compassion. Then she goes and burns his hut down. Yes, I hated that one, Claudia said. Why? I said, I liked it. It doesn't tell you anything useful, she said. All it says is that this psychotic old bitch has got this poor monk in her clutches and has resorted to violence because he isn't exactly what she thinks he should be. It's a horror story, really, of someone who sets out to ruin someone's life, like an obsessive stalker. Only if it's seen from the monk's perspective, I said. We drank a bit more, and then Claudia reminded me of the manuscript about a teenager who takes up gardening and accidentally grows lots of carnivorous plants that speak to her all the time and become her only friends. We both started giggling and trying to remember terrible lines from it. Then, out of the blue, Vi said to me, "Oh my God, Meg, when exactly are you going to realise that the world is more complicated than a predictable formula? You're so scared of taking things seriously. It's no wonder you can't get on with your real novel." If she hadn't begun by using my name, I would have assumed she was talking to Claudia. It was the first time she'd said anything to me that wasn't supportive, kind, or indulgent. I didn't react to it very well. "I'm so sick of this," I said back, before I'd really thought about what I should say. "Don't you realise that anyone can put together a story that has no shape? Anyone can take a few random actions and string them together. Children do it all the time. The real skill is, as Claudia says, you need to find original ways of doing everything Aristotle said you should do, which isn't at all as easy as just following his instructions. It takes some real hard work to create a reversal that's not cliched, to have a recognition that isn't based on a token or a sudden realisation or something the hero knew all along, but on the rising action and tension in the whole plot. You should read Aristotle again because he tells you not just how to write those bottle of oil stories, but proper, meaningful tragedies. And yes, they're predictable too, sort of. But he says that one of the key things the writer has to do is to make the person who hears or reads the story feel astonished, even though the story itself has a formula and is written in accordance with probability and cause and effect. It's a great art to make someone surprised to see the picture, and even more surprised when they realise they had all the pieces all along. But that's the trick, Vi said. Making people feel astonished when they hear the same old story is just the same as making people want a new kitchen every 2 years, and new clothes, and makeovers. People somehow forget that they've heard it all before. These narratives don't make them see anything new. They don't defamiliarise anything in their lives. How does throwing together some random events help people to see things anew? I said. Every time I go out, I see random events. It's not art. Art needs artfulness. No one said that there's nothing in the vast space between formulaic narrative and completely random events, Vi said. Life at its least artful is life that's trying to follow a formulaic narrative, don't you think? I didn't know what she meant, so I said no. I paused, but she didn't say anything, so I went on. You think Chekhov's so great. I did too, of course, as she well knew. But even Chekhov couldn't get it together to write a novel. He found it too hard. He kept all his best observations and images for it, and they came to nothing, because actually making a plot hang together over 80,000 words or more is almost impossible. Which is what we all discover every time we try to write fiction. And around the time that I was writing Our Tragic Universe, we'd started taking on our first PhD students, and it was something of a surprise that people were finding this really difficult. Like, it's really hard to write a long novel about something important. So I constructed this handy diagram, which is everything you need to know about creative writing. This is the creative writing pyramid. You'll be familiar with food pyramids, where you have to eat most of the thing at the bottom and not the thing at the top. This is similar but different. So at the top, in the top triangle, is the weird shit you will delete but might be genius. So you're going to write the least amount of that. Then next, adjectives and adverbs, which come and go in creative writing at Kent, but mainly go. Verbs and nouns we like. We're all about the verbs and the nouns, but also voice. If you can get a convincing voice, an engaging voice for your project, then I argue that is the most important thing. So I basically took this pyramid and then spun it out over about 300 pages into Monkeys with Typewriters, which is my book all about writing. So all those first year lectures that I did back in whenever, I wrote those up and put those together in this book with further chapters about my own writing practice, how to get published, which I expanded into an MA class last year, and it looked like this at the end. This is my cubist whiteboard because I don't know how to do a panorama. I did have a video, but that wouldn't work. So here's what happens when you want to get your book published. So we're going to share this wisdom with a wider audience now. So that is, well, who recognises what that is? It's Rutherford Cloisters, obviously. And that is, and those are students sitting around a table, and that is the happy face of a student that's just finished their novel. And then they send it to an agent who's in that building, which was supposed to be Centrepoint for reasons unknown. And then they send it to the publisher, and then the publisher sends it to the salespeople, and then they get in their car and go to the bookshop. So we kind of got into slightly sort of commercial analysis here. Just in case that's the publisher, that's the slush pile there. I wanted to just show you a close-up of that. I think I'm a great illustrator. And there's Rutherford Cloisters again. And there's what happened after I destroyed a whiteboard with a permanent marker. I'm lying, it's not. It's just I like taking pictures of hoovers, and there was one there. When I'd been at the university for about 10 years, I got a sort of 10-year itch, I suppose. I've always actually really loved being here. But there was a period of time when I was still lost in Rutherford, as you can see. Estates, who had been my nemesis since the very beginning, started putting those traffic cones in my favourite illegal parking space. I think I'd reached about my 100th parking ticket at this point as well. And some days it felt like the only thing I really loved on campus was this magnolia tree. And I was director of creative writing at the time, which is a slightly wearing job, as those who've done it will know. And one day I was contemplating this magnolia tree, and I thought, need to write a new novel, ref's coming up or something, probably. I felt like I'd done all the sciences. I'd done maths in Popco, which you'll know if you've read that book. The End of Mr. Y has quite a lot of quantum physics in it. And then Our Tragic Universe has more physics, but more the kind of weird physics about the end of time and the end of the universe. What happens then? So I thought, well, what if I were to do biology next and write a book about biology and sex and reproduction and inheritance and those kinds of themes? So I signed up to do the MSc in ethnobotany in the Department of Anthropology, and I did that for a couple of years. Sometimes I pretend I finished it, but I didn't really. It really gave me an insight into what it's like being a student. It was such a valuable experience to see what it is like to sit in a classroom and not be the one in charge, and to have somebody really annoying sitting next to you, and just, I don't know, how people arrange themselves in a room and how the lecturers are. I think it was the best experience for my teaching that I could have had. And I learned a few things about plants as well, although it was quite hard. And I wrote that book. So here come all the bits that you're going to have to bleep out. Right. So yes, I was still director of creative writing when I was putting this novel together, and I was always trying to get organised. So this reading is sort of about to-do lists. Someone call a fucking mathematician. Ollie's to-do list, yes, since he turned 40, he has to-do lists, is taking so long to write that it's becoming clear that even writing the list is going to have to be one of the things on the list. Can a to-do list contain its own construction? Can it exist as a set within a set, or an instruction within an instruction, as a recursive positive feedback loop or whatever? Ollie imagines himself at a dinner party with Derrida, and this is what he's saying to him. And Derrida is nodding and laughing in a French way and saying that this is the most insightful thing about a to-do list that he's ever heard. Bart is there too, saying that if only he could come back to life and rewrite mythologies, then he would include this concept of the to-do list and Ollie's reading of it and use it as a way of defining and, yes, okay, almost satirising, if close reading can be satirical on purpose, which Ollie actually doubts, the whole of the work-mad early 21st century. So Ollie does add write to-do list to his to-do list, partly as a philosophical, mathematical, metaphysical joke, yes, joke, but mainly so he can, in theory at least, start the day by crossing something off. Ollie has never ever seen his wife Clem write a to-do list, but if she did write them, they'd probably be specific, achievable, and so on. Ollie's to-do lists are not like that. They always contain everything that he intends to do with the rest of his life, more or less, or at least the next 2 years. And he makes no distinction at all between short-term goals and long-term goals, or between things to do today, this week, this month, and this year. As a result, Ollie can not only never finish writing his to-do list, all right, yes, keep laughing, Derrida, you big-haired fucking French genius, but has to keep infinite fragments of to-do lists strewn around his desk because Ollie can never cross off all the items on any to-do list he ever makes because they all contain things like answer all emails and organise next year's teaching and apply for big grant and book dental appointment and overhaul 18th century website, which would give Derrida another laugh if you think about it. Did Derrida have to blow dry his hair like that? Or did he in fact... There's a knock at Ollie's door. Ollie's door is always closed because he always has things to do. Other colleagues leave their doors semi-open if they don't mind being disturbed, which is probably what Clem does all the time, not that Ollie is allowed to visit her at work because it might be seen as unprofessional or too domestic or something. Ollie can't possibly ever have his door semi-open because he is never even semi-available because he has so much to fucking do, as evidenced by his to-do list, to which he has just added, as well as write to-do list, read papers for USC, which he has to do by 13:30 today. As well as that, he has to, as usual, answer all emails. At this moment, Ollie has 3,000 emails. Yes, literally 3,000. Well, 3,124. And what the hell is he supposed to do with 3,124 emails? He spends literally all his fucking time filing his emails, replying to some of his emails, and deleting his emails, but they always come back. There are always, give or take, 3,000. They are probably zombie emails. That is why they cannot die. One of Ollie's favourite jokes is this. A woman, let's call her Jacqueline, goes for a night of passion with an elderly wine enthusiast, but is disappointed to discover that he only has a semi on. Do you get it, Derrida? Of course you do, you high-cheekboned dreamboat. Ollie never remembers jokes, but he has remembered this one, so he takes out his iPhone and brings up his notes called Jokes and adds it. He'll tell it to Clem later, despite the fact that he has probably told it to her before. He needs a system not just of remembering his jokes, but who he has told them to and when. Maybe a kind of spreadsheet. So I almost read you the bit, but I wasn't quite daring enough, which is just a straightforward moan about the long battle I had in the Rutherford canteen with this screen and the fact that on days when there was absolutely no reason for that screen to be there, it would be. And the view of the cathedral was just randomly screened off at all times. Obviously, I'm such a bad photographer that I haven't even managed to get the cathedral in my photograph, but the whole point of the design of Rutherford and Eliot is that you get to see the cathedral outside and that students can go and sit there and look at the lovely cathedral. But anyway, I didn't read that bit. It's in the book if you want to read it. Okay, so why does nobody leave Rutherford College even if they can find the exit? Because the other colleges are even more dangerous. Patricia and I got lost one afternoon trying to find a lecture theatre, and this is in the middle of Cornwallis. I don't know if it's still there. I'm frightened of the 10-legged spider because spiders aren't supposed to have 10 legs. I'm interested in spiders as well because what happened after writing The Seed Collectors was it took a bit longer than I thought for the book to be published. It was one of those where the publisher said, give it to us by Christmas and we'll publish in July. So I delivered it on Christmas Eve and they decided to publish it the following July. So I had a whole year with nothing much to do apart from answer my 3,000 emails. So I decided to embark on this project where I'd play tennis for a year. So if you didn't see me in 2014, that's what I was doing. And hopefully, I think my next book might well be the memoir that I wrote of that year, at the end of which I kind of made myself a bit ill, probably by just playing too much tennis, but there was also a weird kind of insect/spider bite theme going on through that. So that's to come. I was really quite ill at the end of that year. I had a few months where I couldn't do very much, and so part of my rehab was I decided that I would write children's fiction, and this really came out of the blue for me. The first one, Dragon's Green, was simply inspired by driving past the actual village of Dragon's Green, which is in Sussex, and just randomly saying to Rod, if I ever wrote a children's book, I'd call it Dragon's Green. And he said, would you ever write a children's book? And at that point, as some of you will remember, on our creative writing entry on our website, it said, we do not do children's fiction. So I thought, well, I can't possibly do that. That would be embarrassing. But I did. And I kind of wrote these 3 books, which are pretty much the opposite of everything that Vi says in Our Tragic Universe. So for years, I was playing around with ideas about the hero's journey. Was it a good thing? Was it a bad thing? It's archetypal, but is it male? Is it capitalist? Is it all of these things? And then suddenly, when I wasn't feeling that well, I thought, do you know what? I really need to read about / write about a young girl, Effie Truelove, with her sword, who goes off on a journey and vanquishes things. It made me feel a lot better. Unfortunately, Sarah was very nice at the beginning about my schools visits. As a result of publishing these books, I've been to all kinds of schools. I've been to state schools, private schools, nice C of E primary schools, schools in Dover, outreach. I've done it all. And the one thing that I discovered while I was doing this is that school is awful. Obviously there are good things about schools, but what I remembered were my own school days, and I didn't like rules and I didn't like teachers, and but I also got thinking about how power structures work in schools. So when I was 14, I got slightly randomly sent to boarding school for 2 years. And I was taken out of my Sync Comprehensive in Chelmsford, in Essex, and sent to this boarding school in Hertfordshire. So for some reason, I'd never really thought about writing about this experience. But then I found myself writing a short story sometime in 2017, 2018, which I was going to call The Oligarchs Daughter, which was about this Russian girl, Natasha, who comes from a suburb outside Moscow and is sent to a boarding school very much like the one I went to. But this book really came alive when I started thinking about power structures in institutions and what happens when a few people are let in on a supposed secret and some people aren't, and the drama around that. Who is in, who is out, who knows, who doesn't know. And so some of you in this room might recognise the odd pass of this. So what do you need to know for this? Not much. The group of girls that we're following in this book, Oligarchy... Oh, I didn't do that. There we go. So yes, the short story became a novel, and here it is. And the group of girls that we're following have just been called in to see the headmaster, but they don't know why. And there's another teacher in the room that's called Sinjin. There is nowhere for them to sit, so they all stand in front of the massive mahogany desk. Dark pictures hang on the wooden panels that line the study. None of them are of Princess Augusta. They are all men or horses. Dr. Moon is one of those important old people that looks exactly like other important old people. His body is a sack filled with dead kittens, and his skin is a dusty wooden antique. When he walks, it is with an exaggerated limp, because of having once caught his leg in a rat trap in whatever colonial backwater his father was stationed in. He's basically a different species, one that should be respected and revered, and he breathes in, "Good morning, girls." There's a complicated pause. He looks pained, or at least like someone who has just decided to adopt a pained look. What I'm about to tell you is confidential. You won't be able to talk to the other girls about it, do you understand? What we're about to discuss has to stay in this room. Serious nods. Of course, sir, anything you say. Aunt Sonia would not agree to something on these terms, but Aunt Sonia is not here. Also, Aunt Sonia may have forgotten what it's like to be 15 and entrusted with a secret by your actual headmaster. Dr. Moon sighs long and hard like a plane landing. The plane comes to a halt. Bianca is dead, he says. He says it without emotion. Tash wants to laugh. She can feel the prickle coming off the other girls as well. They all want to laugh and wait. No, in fact, Donya has fainted. Sinjin is wafting something over her that might be a paperback copy of the general prologue to the Canterbury Tales. It might even be the copy with the bits of dead bee on it. Now she is calling sick bay. Everyone else stands there trying to seem grown up enough to be able to take this news without laughing or fainting. Is there any other possible reaction? Tash feels oddly excited, like standing on the edge of a high diving board. She can feel her actual blood pumping around her actual body, and she sways, gulps, but does not faint. No one knows what to do. Who is going to be the first to cry? Are they expected to cry? If they cry over something that is essentially a secret, will other people find out? But if they don't cry over their friend who is dead, then... I understand that you were her special friends, says Dr. Moon, as well as the fact that some of you shared a dorm with her. That is why you are being told first. Now, I have to ask you a very serious question. Why do you think that she died? Sinjin shoots him a strange look then. It's almost imperceptible. No one ever talks back to Dr. Moon. If this was Dr. Morgan or Mr. Hendricks, they would be asking all sorts of inappropriate questions right now. Where was she found? When did it happen? Okay, those are appropriate questions, but on hearing she was found in the lake, perhaps they would ask if she had been partially eaten by fish, and inquire whether or not she floated, and whether the VBs were involved, and what Princess Augusta would think about it all. Perhaps. No one says anything. You all spend a lot of time on diets, I hear. Everyone looks at the floor. We've read Bianca's diary. There are going to be a lot of changes in the next few weeks. I expect you to cooperate with them. Everyone nods. Sir, says Rachel, what do we say when people ask where Bianca is? She's been suspended, he says, for leading you all astray, for encouraging you all to diet too much. St. John gives him the look again. If this were a different teacher, the girls would definitely argue. Objectively, it is a stupid idea with the potential for maximum trauma. What's going to happen when everyone finds out that these 6 girls were able to lie about something so grave? Will this enhance their future prospects or not? Is this something that they can put on university applications? Ability to lie about something really, really serious. No one is sure. Something isn't right about this. I'm going to discuss it with the other senior staff, says Dr. Moon, but at the moment this is what we've decided to do. You can talk among yourselves. We know you'll want to do that. Your dorms are away from the others, so whenever you want to go there in the day you can. But you need to promise that you will not tell anyone for now, not even your parents. Silence. Do you promise? Yes, sir. Danielle takes Bianca's bed. It doesn't quite fit with the suspension story. After all, how normal is it for one girl to be suspended and then have her things boxed up and put into storage while another girl moves in? Maybe, whispered the other girls, maybe Bianca's been expelled. That becomes the official, unofficial story, even though the fake suspension hasn't even been announced. Danielle's been on some kind of waiting list, apparently. Her parents are splitting up and selling the house in the village. Her mother is moving to London and her father is relocating to Dubai. Danielle lies in Bianca's bed crying and listening to Lemonade and making a friendship bracelet with only black embroidery thread. The pattern looks lovely, even though the colour is the same all the way through. But then Danielle is talented like that. The other girls flutter around like pages torn from a forbidden book, and no one makes jokes about Pooh or Princess Augusta. They don't cry in case someone sees them. They're taking their secret very, very seriously. Occasionally they look at each other and say, "My God." If they do need to cry, they lock themselves in one of the bathrooms and run all the taps. On Monday, and without warning, Dr. Moon comes into the dining hall at breakfast and announces to everyone that Bianca is dead. Usually I read, there are quite a lot of darkly funny, too dark for some people, but darkly funny bits in that book, but I thought some people here might appreciate that one. Anyway, here's Oligarchy in a box, looking shinier than it did before, and I think that is the end.